Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan Moore with HMS Psyche, and I can't tell you how excited today we are to have our ship's cook, Girth Pretty, give us a great little chat about the rations that were handed out to sailors at the time. Girth is a cook outside of the reenactment community and is also known for his personal business, Lakeview Cheese. So if you're into cheese, he's the man to talk to. As people come in, I'm going to continue to admit them, but just let yourself stay on mute for the moment, and we'll come back to any questions or comments in the chat or verbal questions at the end. So just hold yourselves. Until then, we're going to be doing a short 30 to 40-minute presentation with questions at the end. It looks like a great turnout today. I'm going to hand it over to Girth, and he's going to carry on from here.
Great, thanks a lot, Ryan. All right, I'm going to try and keep this to 30 minutes because, boy, there's a lot of information. So thank you very much, everyone, for zooming in tonight. To let you know what my background is, as per Ryan commented, I am actually a professional cook. I used to work for Parks Canada, and that's where you could say my interest in historical cooking started up when I first worked at Fort Malden at the mouth of the Detroit River. And on one day off, I decided, okay, I'm going to go into the cook's kitchen and prepare some food. And my supervisor came around and said, well, you do realize you're not getting paid? I said, yeah, I'm here to have fun and learning how to cook griddle cakes over the hearth. So, and every different national park I'd go to, I'd go and visit the local, that I worked at, I would go and visit the local National Historic Site and learn more about the life of that they were portraying at that site, and especially of the food and of cooking. So I love to cook, and I love to share my knowledge and passion of food and cooking with everyone. So tonight, as per the presentation, it's regarding the rations that were issued to every sailor, every seaman and officer aboard the Royal Navy in the early 1800s. So I'm going to try and debunk a few myths. First, that the food aboard ship was horrible, that the seamen and the officers were always starving. And so I hope by the end of this presentation, you're going to realize, yeah, that's all horse puckies, to the point where actually the seamen were quite well taken care of to a perspective. So first, we need to talk about the supply chain. How did the food get aboard ship? Because I have to step back one moment. I'm actually going to share with you a screen image. Oh, can you permit me there, Ryan, or make me co-host for a moment? Because I want to show you. Okay, perfect. Great, thank you.
Just make sure to give it back to me when you're done.
Oh, definitely. Aye, sir. So this is how much food every seaman and officer was issued on a weekly basis. And so if you look, and we're going to go through this a little bit more, but there's a lot of food there, to the point where it's actually 5,000 calories of food on a daily basis. If you compare that to modern standards right now, a very active adult male requires about 3,200 calories per day. They're issued 5,000. You also have to keep in mind that the only source of heating truly was from within and them wearing their wool. And they were on 4-hour watches. So, they would be working, doing physical hard work, and burning off a lot of calories. So let's see, now how do we turn off that? Stop share. Okay, we'll come back to this in a few moments. So how did all that food get aboard ship? Well, the first thing is you had the victualling board, and they were responsible to supply the rations as per the day-to-day instructions of the Board of Admiralty. So they had purchased large quantities of live beef and pork. So in the fall, there would be drovers bringing down herds of cattle and pork to slaughterhouses closer to, actually right at the victualling yards. They'd be slaughtered, then they'd be brined or salted and cured and put into barrels. They would also be buying large quantities of oatmeal and dried peas. Plus, as well, they established their own bakeries so that they had their own ship's bread biscuits. They also had their own breweries so that when a ship left England, they would have enough beer to last a little while. Probably the most important division of the victualling yard was the cooperage. They had to have so many coopers building all these barrels to store all the food in. Now, there were various key locations across Great Britain for the victualling yards: Deptford, Portsmouth, Plymouth, Leith, Cork, and also Greater Yarmouth. And, you know, they would employ up to 2,400 tradesmen. And, you know, that are the bakers, the butchers, the brewers, the coopers, also the stores keepers, the I think they're called hoy watchers, which is the men responsible for organizing the smaller boats to bring the supplies from the victualling yard to actually to the vessels and the ships. And last but not least, the rat catchers, because of course, if all this food around, there'd be vermin. Now, from what I've read in all my research, historically, there's only about 10% of spoilage of food. And when you keep this in mind, that in 1797, the Royal Navy had 100,000 seamen around the world, and they were supplying them with enough food for their well-being. When you consider that 10%, that is really low. That's actually to modern day standards in a restaurant. Any chef always tries to keep their spoilage to less than 10%. So all this food was prepared and brought to the victualling yards, or was at the victualling yards. When it came aboard to the vessel or to your ship, it'd be the ship's master who would be responsible for the stowage of all the food and beverage supplies, and also of the livestock that was brought aboard. Where are we going to put all these barrels, all these casks, so it does not affect the trim of the boat? And also, where are we going to put the cattle? Where are we going to put the goats, the sheep, and even the chickens? Because there was livestock aboard vessels, aboard the ships. So once it was all on board the ship's captain himself was responsible for signing off the receipt that this came on board, and also of the use of the supplies. You know, we always think of well, I shouldn't say we always think, but we think of those fictional captains where they're, you know, playing the violin and going off and doing scientific research. Well, many of them, most of their days were signing forms, you know, signing books, signing logs, keeping up with the administration. They would have the ship's clerk as well, but still it had to have their signature on it. The next person responsible regarding the food was the ship's purser. Big surprise here. They were responsible financially for all the food stores. If they lost anything, it would come out of their finances when the ship was paid off. So they had to make sure that everything was properly issued, written down, and signed off by the captain. The ship's purser was also responsible for actually issuing the food, the daily rations, and the inventory to each mess cook. So if you remember that scene of in Hornblower, where the purser is there with a half pint, taking out whether dried peas or oatmeal, and putting it into a mess fid, that is what they'd be doing. Then there's the position of the ship's cook. Well, this is a little bit of misnomer. The ship's cook did not cook. They were responsible for the steep tubs because the salt beef had to soak in water for a good 12 hours to try and remove all the salt out, or as much of the salt as possible, so that it becomes more palatable. The ship's cook was also responsible for handing out the boiled rations to the mess cooks. And he and his mates, his cook's mates, were responsible for cleaning of the cauldrons on a daily basis. Because most of the food was all boiled, considering, you know, vessels might have from a few hundred up to over 800 to close to 1,000 seamen on board. So very, very interesting. So the real most important person to the seamen was their mess cook. So as you know, groups of 8 to 10 seamen would be put together. Actually, they would have the choice after every month whether or not they wanted to change mess, but they would be initially put together, and one of them would be selected or voluntold to become the mess cook for a week. Now, the mess cook was excused from regular duties of their watch because they were busy preparing the meals for their mess. They would go to the purser once a day and go and receive all of their rations. They would prepare the ingredients ready to be boiled in a net or in a bag by the ship's cook. They would serve the boiled food to their messmates. And then afterwards, clean up all the equipment that they used. Now, the mess cook most likely had no knowledge, no experience on how to cook, on how to try and make things. You know, it's with time and by talking to other members of their mess saying, all right, well, you're next time you make a spotted dog steamed pudding, okay, don't forget to add in the raisins. And you didn't have enough fat, enough suet in there. So, because, you know, they weren't cooks, they weren't professionals. Now, the seamen were fed 3 times a day. Breakfast at approximately 8 a.m., where they'd have 45 minutes to eat. Their main meal of the day, which was dinner, which is approximately around noon, they had 90 minutes to enjoy the food. And then finally at 5:30 p.m. would be their evening supper. And again, they would have approximately 45 minutes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at all the ingredients and talk about how much they were issued. So the first thing is they are offered, or not offered, issued bread or biscuits, 1 pound per each seaman in each mess. So if they were in port, they would actually have soft bread. But if they were not in port, they would be eating ship's biscuits, hardtack, and which is basically double baked bread. Has very little flavoring to it. It does keep a long time until moisture gets to it. And these would just be stored in bags. Once the moisture got into these, then that's when critters, especially say bargemen, various different kinds of insects would start infiltrating into the bread. And that's why in some movies, you know, you see them tapping their bread to get the bugs out, or they would be soaking these into their stew to make it softer to be able to chew on it, because it's hard. On one occasion, myself and members of the Royal George at the Wasaga Under Siege event, I had them pounding with a glass bottle to make the ship's biscuits more into a fine powder to use it for thickening the stew. And it was amazing seeing the members of the public asking, what are you guys doing? Well, we're pounding the bread to thicken up our stew. Wow, okay. So you get about 5 or 6 of these every day. So that's the ship's biscuits. Beer. 1 gallon of small beer every day would be issued to you until the beer went sour. So small beer, about 2 or 3% alcohol, and it'd be issued twice a day with breakfast, and then later on in the afternoon with your evening meal. So 1 gallon per person aboard ship. So again, think of a vessel like, say, the St. Lawrence here on the Great Lakes. She had a crew of 800, including the officers. You needed 800 gallons of beer every day. So that's the beer issue. Beef. Easiest way to store food back then was salting it. So the sailors would receive, this is actually 2 pounds of salt beef. They'd receive 2 pounds twice a week. So they'd receive 4 pounds in total a week. You have to steep it in the freshest water that is available to try and extract as much of the salt as possible. Now, the ship's captains were required by the Navy, whenever they were able to offer fresh beef or pork instead of the salt beef. And they would actually issue, I think it was 3 pounds of fresh beef as compared to 4 pounds of fresh beef on a weekly basis. So this is a fresh beef. To be honest with you, this fresh beef, no, that's not this salt beef is about 4 years old. I've had it in brine that I bought at a Loblaw store. And when I was doing presentations quite often regarding naval rations, that's when I bought this. I would just put it back into its container with the brine. And well, my dogs were kind of licking their lips and their chops when they were smelling this. It still smells good, even though it's still heavily salted. So you get 4 pounds of beef on a weekly basis, 2 issues of 2 pounds. You would also get salt pork, 1 pound twice a week. The other issue, so that was pretty much the major protein. The next one is oatmeal. Now this is steel cut oatmeal, not rolled oats. It takes longer to cook. And they would receive, well, this is actually a half pint. So no, wait a minute, where's my full pint? Oh, it's in the other room. So imagine something is bigger than this. Well, it's almost a pint. You'd receive 3 pints of oatmeal a week. So on Mondays you get a pint. On Wednesdays you get a pint. On Fridays you get a pint to make oatmeal. You know, I'm getting thirsty. You know, it's hot being around the Brody stove all the time, which is the piece of machinery you see beside me, and this is the one actually from HMS Victory. The other you would receive, other dry good, were peas. P-E-A-S-E, peas. And you would receive 2 pints of this on a weekly basis. So 4 times a week, you'd receive half a pint of dried peas. They would also receive 6 ounces of butter a week, so 3 times 2 ounces, and 3 times a week they receive 4 ounces of cheese, which initially was a kind of cheese called Suffolk, but they could replace it with cheddar or trying to think of all the other territorial cheese, and this is pretty bad considering I work in the cheese business. Cheshires and Lancashire territorial cheese. The thing regarding butter, and I don't have it here right now, is because it would go rancid really fast. The cheese would be very popular with the rats. So, and also I'm in the cheese business, so I'm sorry guys and ladies, I ate the cheese. So that is the food that was guaranteed every day, every week for every seaman and officer. Now there could be substitutions. So what would happen, say, if you didn't have all these ingredients? Well, if you didn't have enough bread, the purser could substitute a pound of bread for a pound of rice. The purser could also, and also with each crew, each mess, they could say, well, we don't want our full ration of, say, beef. Could we have, for the 4 pounds of beef, could we have 3 pounds of flour with 1 pound of raisins? And then, well, wait a minute, now we need to trade some raisins for some suet. So it's half a pound of suet for a pound of raisins so that we can make our steamed puddings. And also for a pound of cheese, they could either get another pound of rice, a pound of sugar, half a pint of oil, or half a pint of cocoa, or half a pint of tea. So every day, the mess cook would have to go to the purser and inform him how many men are in his mess, because some of them may be sick, so they'd be in the sick bay. And the purser would check that with his files so that, again, each mess would be issued exactly the right amount of food. So like, okay, here's a mess of 10. Well, actually 2 of them are in the sick bay, but we won't tell the purser that. We'll get extra rations. Nope. Purser would know and would exactly give the right amount of food to every mess cook. So all the food, so say the beef and the pork, would be steamed in nets in the big cauldrons that the ship's cook was responsible for with his cook's mates. Meanwhile, there could have been some vegetables. Carrots and onions were the most common vegetables on board ship. Then it would be carrots, turnips, and pumpkins to a lesser degree. Root vegetables would store much longer aboard a vessel, aboard a ship. And they would add in those cabbage, those vegetables into another net and boiled. If they're cooking, say, the steamed puddings, again, all assembled together. So the flour, the suet, maybe some sugar and some raisins mixed in together and then put into a cotton bag and then put into a third kettle to boil. Now, it was very important that the ship's cook gave back to each mess the right bag. So each bag or net would be identified with a small little wooden token with a number, and that would identify which mess it is. But can you imagine on board some ships like the Victory or the St. Lawrence, where there could be potentially up to 100 to 150 messes or messes? What's a plural of mess? And so, they had to always make sure that the right bag or right net went back to the right mess cook. Now, seamen could augment their supplies. Depending on the captain, they would give them permission to fish when they're not on duty. So they could capture some or catch some live fish and add them into their stews. If the guaranteed rations were lacking from the purser, they would receive actual money that they could then use to buy more rations when they would come into port. And that'd be via the bumboats. So private victualers would come out offering in their boats all sorts of other supplies, and so that then the different messes could augment their food rations. Some of them would even maybe buy chickens so they could have fresh eggs, and then when the chickens stopped laying, all right, chicken's going into the pot. Simple as that. Oh yes, the other thing. What happens when the ship and vessel is going through bad weather? Or, oh Ryan, there's 2 people waiting to get in. Or there's also going into battle, or they're about to load gunpowder into aboard ship. Very simple. The ship's cook would not be permitted to light the Brody stoves and to cook hot food. So on those days, on those occasions, it would all be, beer or grog, what a shame, cheese, butter, and of course their hard bread. And that would be their supplies. Can you imagine when ships were trying to round the horn and maybe for 2 or 3 weeks due to bad weather, they would not be allowed to light their stoves and this is what they're eating. So, again, it all depends on the conditions of sailing, if the cooks were able to fire up the stoves so that all the seamen were able to get hot food. The other thing too is that whenever possible, the ship's captain would be requested to try and buy fresh vegetables so that then the seamen would get fresh vitamins into them. Because of course, scurvy was always an issue until they finally realized, till the Admiralty finally realized that fresh vegetables as well as vitamin C coming from citrus fruits was the best way for curing scurvy. It actually became a national secret because they did not want the French or the Spanish or the Dutch to know about this national secret, because this is by having the vitamin C, that's how the Royal Navy was able to stay out on cruises and on blockade duty for so long. There's a few different books I'd highly recommend. This book here by Jan McDonald, Feeding Nelson's Navy, is fantastic. It actually even has a few recipes in the book dealing on how to making your own ship's biscuits, both the modern and the traditional way. If you want to make your own salt beef, go right ahead, as well as salt pork, sauerkraut. There's a recipe here for peas pudding. What else is here? Sea pies, lobscouse, and also the portable soup that would be fed to the sick seamen down in sick bay. So this is a very good book. From the same author, from Jan McDonald, and this one I have to crack more into, is the British Navy's Victualling Board, 1793 to 1815, Management, Competence, and Incompetence. So this is much more heavy reading. It's not a cheap book. I think I paid $150 for it. So it's a great Christmas gift if you're looking for someone to give you something. And then for more recipe ideas, if you've read the Patrick O'Brien series, there's the book Lobscouse and Spotted Dog, where actually a mother and a daughter decide to research every recipe and offer both the historical recipe and the modern version. I've done many of the recipes in here other than the guano soup, and it's a great book, and also really shows, say, the different styles of cooking around the world during the Napoleonic time period. So highly recommend it. I think this is one of my shortest presentations. I thought it was going to last longer, but there's still so much more I could be talking about, but I want to make sure to leave time so people can ask questions. So let's look at the chat box, see if there's any questions so far. Guano soup, Carl's asking, and what the primary ingredient? Well, guano is bird dung. So in one book, Stephen Matron actually has gone aboard this rocky islet to look at the birds, and I don't know if it was I don't know if at the time there was a Surprise or the Sophie, but she got caught in a gale, and it took them 2 days to get back. So he basically survived on drinking the water in the puddles with all of the bird excrement. And someone asked, is that the same as bird's nest soup? No, I've actually had bird's nest soup, Michael. Bird's nest soup is made from the actual nest of an Asian swallow. And up on these caves are actually these cliffs, and men climb up to get these nests, wash them, and then it's made into a soup. It's very expensive because these nests are very hard to get to. I had it when I was a young boy living in Montreal as part of a special engagement party dinner for friends of our family. So let's see if there's any other questions.
Yeah, just going up to the top, Griff, the first question was from Commander Wan. He was asking about what records do we have from the Kingston dockyard? Was that also a victualling yard? And what local food was consumed from that dockyard?
That's a good question. I need to do more research regarding Kingston. There was the naval yard there for building vessels. I would say most likely Halifax was the victualling yard for the North American station, and then supplies would come up to St. Lawrence to make it to Kingston, and then reissue to all the vessels and the ship that were based in Kingston. And also keeping in mind that all those other supplies would have to make it to Lake Erie and to the upper Great Lakes for supplying the other vessels as well. So, and also, especially after the Battle of Lake Erie, they had to find a different way of getting supplies up to Fort Michilimackinac or Fort Mackinac, and that's where Yonge Street in Toronto was used for bringing food supplies up to Holland's Landing, all the way to the 9 Mile Portage, finally onto the Nottawasaga River, up to Schooner Town, where the Nancy was based, and the Nancy would bring the supplies all the way up to Fort Mackinac until she was discovered by the American squadron, and she was scuttled and was put to fire by the British. So Jason's saying the HMS Nancy logbook discussed some of the rations involved. Yeah. The great thing about our hobby, everyone, is that we never stop learning. And so, I've done all sorts of reading, but I always love hearing from more people from what they've read and found in their research.
So another question from Jim Coey was, if there's Army troops aboard, if the Navy is transporting the junior service, what were they fed on board ship?
Oh, well, obviously more rations would have had to been brought on board. I believe actually from what I've read in Feeding Nelson's Navy, the Army was given a bit more meat than the Navy, but less in the dry goods. So less in the oatmeal and less in the dried peas. So you can imagine a transport ship bringing troops over from England to North America. They had to make certain that they had enough supplies first for the crew and then also for all of the soldiers. And then also keep in mind, what about all the horses? So, huge amount of questions dealing with regarding making sure there was enough supplies. I see Josh was asking, what about cocoa? Yes, cocoa could be a substitute item for cheese. So there was some on board. Plus as well, the seamen could receive some tea or cocoa or even maybe some coffee. Or for those of you who experienced my Scotch coffee at the Beat to Quarters event at Fort George in 2016. Yes, you could grind up the ship's biscuits, burn them, and put hot water on them, and there you go. There's your morning beverage.
Contains no caffeine. Don't let them fool you.
Yeah.
So when sailors purchased their own food as a substitution when they were given money, where was it stored, and who made sure it went back to the people who owned it?
I would say, well, I have to do some more research on that perspective. I would say most likely the men of the individual mess would keep it in their footlockers. And then when it was to be cooked, again, it'd be going either into a net or into a canvas bag that had their mess number attached to it. So the ship's cook would say, all right, meat bag number 9, mess number 9, come and get your meat. Cotton canvas bag number 9, mess number 9, come and get this bag.
Can you tell us a little bit about slush?
So yeah, so when you cook the salt beef or the salt pork, there is fat on it. You're cooking it and boiling it in water. The fat will melt a little bit and would float up to the top of the kettle. As part of the privilege of the ship's cook, he was allowed to take off the slush off the top of the kettles. Some of it had to be set aside for the bosun in case they needed it for any of the rigging work, or even say for the gunner for lubricating, say, the trunks of the guns. The rest he could keep. And actually, whenever he would come into port, quite often he would sell off the slush to candle makers. He could also sell it to the seamen if they needed extra fat for creating their puddings.
What kind of
There's
dishes?
a term of slush fund.
What kind of dishes did the sailors eat off of it, and how did they keep them clean?
They'd either have bowls or maybe a plate, and they quite often would actually have it on a square charger. So the expression of 3 square meals a day, that's where it came from, because then you would put your bowl or your plate inside that square charger, so that then as the ship is rolling from side to side, okay, your bowl or plate would only go a little bit from side to side. Each seaman would be responsible to supply their own cutlery, bowl, plate, tankard. How do they clean them? If any of you gone camping before, probably just maybe even rinsed. That's about it, I would say. Even if that.
All right, I'm gonna take one more question because we've got 1 minute left. How long did the sailors have to wait for cooked food after gunpowder came on board?
Well, it'd probably take about 2 hours really to get the stoves going again, either you firing using wood or coal, and then enough time for the kettles to start boiling. So it would probably be, say, if the gunpowder came in the morning, they would have a hot meal at supper time.